Welcome to the 6th episode of Minerals and Billions podcast. In this podcast, we discuss about mining industry and battery value chain. But on top of that, we also discuss about broader themes relating to industries and economy. I'm your host, Matti Hietanen. Welcome. In this episode, we discuss about Boliden, and we have Mikael Staffasin, CEO and President of Boliden, here today with us. Welcome, Mikael.
Thank you.
So, you have been working as the president and CEO of Boliden now for 8 years. What does it require to be successful in your role, and what takes most of your daily time?
That's an interesting question. I get it many times, so I have a little bit of a prepared answer for that question. I usually say, linked to this, that I never read any management books, because all management books that you read are all the same way. They say that if you can do one thing and you need to figure out the one thing and you do it right, then you will be successful. So it's either you focus on the customers, or you focus on your employees, or you focus on quality, and you do one thing and then everything will be fine. I usually say that my job is absolutely the opposite. There are 100 things to do and you cannot do any of them wrong, because if you do any of them wrong, then you have a big problem. So my work is to make sure that I feel comfortable about the levels that we have of everything from production, environment, people, government relationships. All these things need to fit together. And of course, I'm only one of 8,000 employees, so I cannot do it all myself. But my job is to make sure that we have a machine running that can do all of these things.
I did some background work as well, and I learned that you are famous for being a really active traveler. So what are the most exotic places where you have been, and what is still on your bucket list?
There are quite a few things on my bucket list. The more things you travel to, the more things you want to see. Seeing the gorillas, for example, in Africa in real life, and I've done that twice, is of course something that is very special that I would put on anybody's bucket list. I have not been to the Galapagos Islands, and maybe you can add that one as something that I still would like to do. I don't know exactly when, but at some stage I'll get there as well.
And you're also known for being really active in orienteering, and there is a Finnish connection in that as well.
That's right. I mean, orienteering was, when I was young, my big sport, and I have been running all the big orienteering races, and I was 15 years old when I first ran the Jukkola race here in Finland some 45 years ago, and I've done that several times afterwards as well. So that's been a link to Finland, and I usually say that because of this link, and because Jukkola usually is in very odd places, I have been to more parts of Finland than most Finns.
Yeah, and I also have personal experience that because of this background, you are in a good shape, because a couple of years ago we went for a joint morning run together with you and Peter Karlsson from Northvolt, and I remember that you went quite fast, and as a Finn, I obviously made sure that I'm not left behind, but I felt that I'm going to have a heart attack, but in this group I just couldn't quit, so I think that I survived, but I remember that it was quite fast pace that you two kept running.
Well, it's good that you survived.
All right, so let's go into Boliden. So Boliden might not be that familiar for everyone in Finland, especially. So tell us a little bit about Boliden in general. What do you do?
I think that your comment is kind of right on spot, in the sense that we are not so known and we should be much more known. So Boliden as a company formed about 100 years ago. We're 100 years old, from northern Sweden originally. First thing was gold, but very quickly moved over to base metals. So today we are into base metals. That is copper, that is zinc, that is nickel, that is lead. We still do a little bit of precious metals and gold and silver as well, and a little bit about platinum group and so on. We are still mainly in Sweden. That's maybe about half of our total activities in Sweden, but about 25% will be in Finland. And then we have other activities around Europe, which makes us that we are clearly the largest base metal mining and smelting company. I should maybe also clear, we mine and we smelt and do finished metal.
So what is the weight of Finland in your business overall?
Roughly 25%. So Finland is not at all insignificant. It's quite important. We have one large mine and two big smelters in Finland.
And you are a stock-listed company, and I did some background work here as well, and found out that 38% of your shareholding is in Sweden, and only 1% in Finland, even though that you have these operations here. So what do you think that is a reason for this?
It's a very good question. It is not because of lack of trying. I have personally, and my team has spent time in Finland with the Finnish institutions to try to make it more interesting, and both because it is in Finland, but also because it's an interesting industry. But for some reason, we have not been successful. And you're absolutely right. We have about 1% of our owning in Finland, which is then much lower than a whole set of other countries. And Sweden, as you said, close to 40% of our holding is still in Sweden, but 60% is abroad, and out of those 60, only 1 in Finland. I would like it to be much more.
So obviously now, because of the group's presence both in Finland and Sweden, and obviously in other countries as well, but in this case, especially Finland and Sweden, you have first-hand experience that what it is to operate mines and smelters in different Nordic countries. So based on your experience, what are the biggest similarities and then biggest differences between Finland and Sweden from the business perspective?
Well, from our point of view, the similarities are, of course, the bigger part. A mine is a mine, and a mineral is a mineral, and a smelter is a smelter, and it's pretty much the same. There are certain things that are a little bit different. Finland is slightly more hierarchical than Sweden would be, which also goes through in the way you manage things. I usually say it's more difficult to be a boss of a Finn than a Swede, because when you say something to your subordinate Finn, he or she will do it, as opposed to when you say to a Swede, he or she will argue back and then do it. And that's why it's a bit dangerous, because if you say the wrong thing will get done. So that's a little bit more of that. On a little bit of another area, for us, government relationships and everything that has to do with permits and everything else is very important. And here I might get a little bit some Finns to get upset again, but I always have said for many years in a positive sense that Finland is about 10 years after Sweden. And that was positive all the time, because Sweden was going the wrong direction. It was getting more and more difficult, more and more bureaucratic, everything taking more time. Finland was still more pragmatic, and it was easy to get things done. I would say that Sweden has now turned the corner. It's actually getting easier in Sweden and getting better. And Finland is now still kind of making things more difficult. So now it's suddenly become, from our point of view, a drawback to be 10 years behind.
Well, these observations obviously are interesting, and I'm sure that Finns and also Finnish decision makers can learn a lot from Swedish experiences as well. And obviously one hot topic in Finland and in this industry recently has been the mining taxation. You have been very vocal about the consequences of these recent tax decisions. So basically, mining tax was quadrupled, and then electricity tax of mines was made 45 times higher than what it was before. So how do you now feel about this, and then what are the consequences after these decisions?
Well, I don't feel good at all, and I hope that Finland will reverse these decisions at some stage, because they're not good at all. We have, as everybody knows, we have announced that in Kehittymässä, which is our big mine in Finland, and it's also about 1/3 of nickel production in Europe. So it's a big mine and important also for Europe's nickel production. This mine, the way that it's set up right now and with the investments done, is going through roughly 2033. But there's more stuff in the ground. That's not the end of nickel in the ground. And we've said very clearly that you could probably extend the life of mine by at least 10 years by going from then maybe 2033 to 2043. But that's a big investment. There's maybe €1 billion investment. So it's a large investment to do that, because there's lots of what we call pre-stripping that needs to get done. And not only is it a lot of money, it also takes some time. So that decision has to be made now in order to be ready with the next stage of the mine until 2033, when the existing stage is depleted. And that decision we have drawn back. And because of that, we're also having negotiations with the unions in northern Finland. We are likely to come out with reductions around that, which I think is sad. But there are also secondary consequences which has to do with smelters, and in our case specifically the Harjavalta smelter. Harjavalta is today fed roughly 25% from Kevitsa, and the other 75% is fed on global markets. You have to compete with Chinese smelters and everybody else to get concentrate from South America and other places. And this is getting tougher and tougher as well, as China is really making this difficult and are competing very hard for these concentrates. And it is a little bit unclear whether a copper smelter, a nickel smelter in Finland that has lots of drawbacks in terms of logistics and other things can survive if you don't have any feed coming locally from Finland. So the problem in Finland is really you have a big metal processing industry, your copper smelters, zinc smelters, steel mills, everything else, and a mining sector that's very small. And I think that over time it will be also a threat to the metal processing sector if you do not get more mining in Finland. And then of course mining taxes makes things much more difficult and you get less mining. Both from the fact that it gets more expensive, and you mentioned the taxes that are there, there's actually one more thing which has to do with the indirect compensation for the EU ETS system that Finland, even though it's allowed from an EU point of view, has decided not to use, which is another drawback compared to our competitors in Germany and other places. So it is quite tough, and I think that we're lacking is a little bit of a coherent industrial policy.
So basically the message is that mining tax, for example, doesn't affect only the mine itself, but also the more like a downstream industry as well.
Yes, it will. It will for sure, because these are linked. Once upon a time, Finland was much more balanced in terms of its processing industry and its mining industry. The mining industry has developed much worse than the processing over time, but I would say looking forward, processing is in a big challenge if you cannot have mines also operating in Finland.
We are now recording this at the end of May, and I was last week in Brussels, and I learned there that 1/3 of smelters in Europe have been curtailed or shut down over the last few years, and the message also was that there is no profit-making smelting business in Europe. So do you agree with this?
No, I agree with that in principle. Yes, it's quite difficult to operate a smelter because you're competing very hard for the raw material with Chinese and others who are buying the same and working very hard on that. And then maybe so far we're slightly better off than the average European smelters because electricity prices, which is also important, are in Finland and in Sweden and in Norway for that matter as well. Even though we complain that they're high, and they are high, they're still lower than they are in Europe. So we are doing okay. But it's not difficult to foresee a future where it would be quite difficult to keep smelters alive in Europe, especially if you close down the existing mines that exist.
Let's then talk more about Kevitsa. So you acquired Kevitsa from First Quantum 10 years ago. Purchase price was about $700 million USD, and now you have been operating the mine for 10 years. So are you happy with the asset after these 10 years, or how do you see that?
Well, generally speaking, quite happy, at least up until about a year ago. So what we did, we bought it. The mine was designed for about 7 million tons of ore per year. It had never done more than 6. We operated it, also put in some more investment. We are now got it up to 10 million tons per year, which was important in order to make it profitable. And we have since basically executed on that plan quite well. So it's been a relatively good position. Now, what is with mines is that you go through lower grades earlier in the mine, and then you always have the best stuff towards the end. So we have, even though it's been going quite well and operationally well, it has not been a huge success from a cash flow point of view because we have been investing and we've been working through lower grades. And then now towards the end, these last 7 years of the existing mine plan is when we're going to have the very good grades and we get the good money to be able to kind of make the economic analysis work out. And then that's when we get hit with the mining tax, which is another thing which irritates you a lot when something that comes out of nowhere, and it's in some way, it's kind of an implicit trust that you have between authorities and a company, that when you have a situation where you're investing a lot, and we've invested even more. We have 800 million euros left of investment that we need to repay in the next 7 years. And we've done even more. You said $700, and then we had lots of other investments in. So we invested even more. And then suddenly at half time, when you change the rules, then it gets not so fun anymore. But up until these last discussions about taxes, it's been going okay, and we're quite happy the way we have operated it.
So talking about this mining tax in the Kevitsa context, so how would the mining taxation go if Kevitsa was in Sweden?
In Sweden, we have no mining tax as such, so that would be good. Now we have other taxes. So it's interesting, in Finland, you've increased the electricity tax for mining, you said 45 times, but diesel tax is actually lower, much lower than in Sweden. So if you were to compare, you have to take in that we pay much more diesel tax in Sweden, but in total it will be much less tax.
And talking about still about Kevitsa, so can you give us any numbers that what is Kevitsa's societal impact to the region? How much job opportunities and tax revenues and GDP does the mine provide?
We're the biggest taxpayer in Lapland, just to put things first in context. We provide somewhere between 500 and 600 jobs full-time with us, and then is always this how many are then going through subcontractors and everything else. You can multiply this maybe by a factor of 3 to get the kind of impact just in Lapland. So it's maybe 2,000 people that are directly impacted by this. The 1 billion that we would have invested to go further for the next stage, that's investment that almost totally would kind of end up in the local economy, because there's lots of local things. It's not that we're buying very fancy equipment that's coming from somewhere far away. It's actually very, very local. So big investment that has to hit the local, big employment that's local, big local tax payments, all that in coming into play in this situation.
Obviously, going from taxes, the next topical theme in relation to mining discussions is sustainability. So obviously sustainability is extremely important for the industry, and this is also something that the public expects from us. So how do you see the role of sustainability in general and especially from Boliden's perspective?
Well, sustainability is an integral part of all what we do. And it's important in that sense that we cannot operate at all if we're not accepted as somebody who has impact on the environment around, both kind of from environmental but also social and economical impact that is either positive or not so much negative.
And if you think about, for example, your KPIs that you are following, so what are the things that are most important for you from this perspective?
Number one, sustainability are 3 things, right? So the first one that we spend, of course, a lot of time is actually financial. If you don't financially are doing okay, then that's not sustainable. So that needs to be a part of this, and that we, of course, follow in many different ways. You have to be social responsible, and that we're looking into. And here, of course, one of the main indicators is the injury frequency that we have and how our employees are doing. And I think here it's an important point that sometimes you should be careful not to brag about, but you need to say something about it. Boliden has 18 years of fatality-free operations, 0 fatalities. And then you can say, okay, why do you brag about that? That's, of course, self-evident. You should not have anybody that dies at the job, and it is. But if we would have been the average good mining company in the world, if you look at the good mining companies and you scale that down to Boliden size, we would have had about 10. Between, maybe 1 every second year or every year. And that's what you see in actually other good mining companies as well. So we've done that very well. And by the way, you can transfer it into Sweden or Finland and look at, had we been at the average kind of heavy industry, we would have had even more, maybe between 10 and 20 fatalities in this year. We're a big company operating in many other places. We've done that. So that's an important part. And then comes the last part, and here it's just environmental, and here we're looking at, number one, of course, impacts on how we are conforming to our permits, and we have permits, and we do break permits. We don't really try to say that we never break permits, but just have a sense of it. We have about 30,000 points every year that we need to comply with. Our permits globally say that we measure things 30,000, they should be within certain limits. And of our 30,000, around 50 every year are outside the permit levels that we have. So it's kind of 2 per 1,000 that are off. So it's much less than 1%. That's of course too many, but at least we followed this very clearly how much deviation we have. And then we have climate. We have a roadmap to be able to cut our CO2 emissions by 30% till 2030, and then longer term more than that. And then we have, which is still a bit difficult to measure, but we are trying to measure it to be net positive in terms of biodiversity.
And then talking about the environmental footprint, that is something that mining companies are quite often actually in public domain criticized for, and that is part of the, let's say, public image that the companies have, and then there is quite a lot of discussion within the industry that how mining companies and the industry could tell its own story and then explain that what is modern mining industry. So what do you think that we could do more here to make sure that people know that what kind of industry and work this actually is?
I think that we need to show the people what a modern mine looks like, and I think it's important. I mentioned before the fact that we have 0 fatality for the last 18 years, but I also usually tell the story that in the 1960s, we had, as Boliden, 40 fatalities in 10 years, roughly one every quarter. In the 70s, we had roughly 30. In the 80s, we had roughly 20. In the 90s, we had 8. And in the 2000s, we had 2. And then since 2008, we are fatality-free. Most of the people who think about mining have either never seen mining, or they have maybe have mining and they have an idea that it looks now as it did 50 years ago. We need to show what modern mining looks like. In Sweden, we've done one example which has been extremely successful, and maybe we can do it in Finland as well. We have been part of sponsoring a work-life reality show called Gruvan, the mine, where you actually follow people in their daily job, what they do in the mine, what does it look like, what they do day to day. And you also again get a chance of looking at the personalities, because we have, even if it's not 50-50, it's much more women than people think. It is not, it's not dirty, it's not dull, it's not dangerous. It's actually high-tech jobs that are interesting with many different angles. And it's been extremely successful, this show. We have had 2 seasons. We're right now recording seasons 3 and 4. And maybe we can do something similar in Finland as well, just to give a sense of what is actually modern mining. What does it look like from a work point of view? The other thing is, of course, the environmental point of view, where in a way you cannot make an omelette without breaking some eggs. I mean, there is an environmental footprint, but I would say that it's been often vastly over-exaggerated, and I think that's also an important point to point out. For example, for most of our mines and our smelter in Sweden, the quality of the water that goes out is better than drinking water quality. It's actually less copper coming out from the Rönnskär smelter than the Skellefteå River has naturally in the background. So we're diluting the natural copper level by the fact that we have a copper smelter there. These are the kind of things that we also need to get out to the public.
Yeah, well, that is a good result that you and good example that you have there. Going from sustainability and local topics to larger circles, so in international politics, mining is now, and critical raw materials are now very very hot topic as well. EU is trying to make sure that European countries will have access to critical raw materials in future, and obviously Finland and Sweden play a big role there. So do you think that this criticalness of these raw materials is well enough understood, for example, in Sweden or Finland already, or is there still room to improve the understanding that how much needed different raw materials are?
I think there's more room to understand this. I think that we have, for the last maybe 30 years, started living in a world where not just when it comes to minerals, but generally speaking, if I want something, I get it. If I just pay, I get it. And by the way, I can look everywhere in the world and I can get the cheapest price and I'll get it. And that's, I think, it's been in the business society, and it's been also kind of in a normal society. And you make this joke that, you don't really need a cow. Why don't you just get the milk from the food store? In the end of the day, you need to get these materials. I think there are quite a few people that understand how all these value chains and supply chains fit together. Not everyone, and maybe not everyone want to see the full consequences. But in the end of the day, when it comes to everything, if you can't grow it, it is mined. Everything that you see around yourself, if you cannot grow it, it's been dug out of the ground in some way. That's the way it is. Sometimes we call that critical because it's difficult to find many sources and it's difficult to find it. And by the way, if it goes away, it will have big impact. Sometimes we'd call less critical because there will be many, there will be other options available for us, or we can do without it. But it's an interesting kind of concept that something is more critical. And by the way, all these critical lists have gotten increased in the latest time. They're now, we're talking about 50 subsidies, because in the end of the day, everything is critical.
In this EU context, obviously Finland and Sweden hold majority of local raw materials, and one thing that I've been privately thinking quite a bit recently is that should Finland and Sweden do more together in EU level to make sure that EU pays enough attention to the like a local supply chains and local industry, and then on the other hand we could perhaps as Nordic countries benefit from EU tools as well.
Without knowing exactly, I think that it's probably true. I think that there are, at least if you take the Boliden side of things, we're already quite a part of an integrated supply chain. The zinc smelter in Kokkola doesn't have any. There are no zinc mines in Finland anymore. There's almost no local zinc supply at all. Most of it comes from Sweden, comes from the Garpenberg mine. So that's a very kind of interesting example of an intra-Nordic countries or intra-Sweden-Finland supply chain that has been built up then by Boliden in the last 20 years around that. So I think that there are more possibilities, and I also think that coming through in the general EU noise, it's of course better if we can work together.
Yeah, because quite often for example, when I'm visiting Brussels, I get this feeling that Brussels is more like paying attention to making sure that they will get the raw materials from third countries, but perhaps a little bit like forgetting this like a local supply chain.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think you could. Of course, it's not easy to be EU bureaucrat either, and you have the example of nickel, which is very clear that even if we keep the Kevitsa mine, we keep the Terrafame mine, maybe we'll get a new nickel mine somewhere in Europe. Europe is still far from self-sufficient in nickel, so you need to get nickel from somewhere else. We are today importing nickel in the form of concentrates into Finland from Brazil, South Africa, Canada, and other places. So that's a way to get it in. But of course, and we don't like that you get in Finnish nickel. That is an unhealthy competition, and we can argue why it's unhealthy. And it comes mainly from Indonesia. Now there are other geopolitical tensions that are in place. That means that Europe should be nice to Indonesia. Otherwise, the Chinese will be nicer to Indonesia, and that has some other consequences, which is not really good for this for the nickel side. And here I think Europe is a little bit schizophrenic, because on one side they say that it's extremely important to get critical raw materials, but they're also saying that there's something else that might be even more important, which has to do with the geostrategic situation.
And obviously it's a quite alarming situation that actually Boliden and Terrafame together are basically producing all the nickel that there is in
from a mining side, it is basically all the nickel. From a smelting side, Boliden's Harjavalta nickel smelter is the only smelter in Europe. So it's extremely dependent on just two companies to get any kind of local nickel into place that has been at least partially worked on locally.
Obviously, Terrafame is still producing zinc as well, but nowadays it is not further refined in Finland, but it goes to Central Europe directly. If we talk about future, how do you see the future of Nordic mining and refining industry?
I mean, in the end of the day, I think that the mining and smelting industry in Europe will have a few tough years, but will survive in some way. I don't think that Europe will allow it to die. And what's happening, as you mentioned before, on the smelting side is already a warning signal. I think that Europe wants to do more mining, even though it's kind of slow and the kind of tedious process is not happening very fast. So I think there's actually pretty good odds for that the industry will continue to grow, even though sometimes you don't think so. But I think they're pretty good odds. We in Boliden have presented, just from our point of view, 7 potential mining projects. This is both new mining projects and extension of existing mines that are scheduled to shut down. And that's a pretty long list of things that could happen, and that could both kind of keep what we have for a longer time and also expand what we do have. But it's a long, tedious process, not just to get the permits, but then also to make sure that you have business cases that can stand on their own feet. And of course, if you then start getting afraid that somebody will slap you with big taxes halfway through the race, you get, of course, more concerned as well.
Well, there will be parliamentary elections in Finland next spring, and obviously you frequently meet with Finnish politicians as well. So what would be your, let's say, top 2 or 3 advice for the Finnish decision makers going forward?
It's, of course, you have to be very careful in this situation, because of course I will talk for my part of the world, and of course politicians have a bigger world to look at than just the mining industry. But I think that Finland is lacking industrial policy in general. I think that you get decision that comes out of nowhere, which is not coherent. And I think that what Finland would need would be a coherent industry policy, hopefully across all kind of potential coalitions that there could be, meaning that hopefully this industrial policy will not change every time you have election, but that they will survive over many elections if you have enough consensus around it. Because there is nobody who can build a mine after an election. You probably have only spent money until the next election. All the money that you're going to generate comes, in 1 or 2 or 3 further elections. So you need to have a stability. And that's what's been frustrating me most of all, the lack of industrial policies in Finland.
So if there is a supportive industrial policy in place, will we see more investments in Finland by Boliden in future?
No, I think so. It's absolutely necessary, and I think it's both on the mining side, where there is the €1 billion on the table of Kevitsa, but then there are other people. Boliden is not the only company around, and then on the metal processing, that's where I'm actually most nervous. Because if the metal processing industry does not survive, and in order to survive, you need to invest. If you stop investing, you're heading only one way. You're heading towards closure. It might take a couple of years, but you're heading only one way. And we need to come into a situation where you also dare to invest in the processing industry.
Thank you, Mikael, for interesting discussion, and all the best for the future. This was the 6th episode of Minerals and Billions podcast. Thank you for watching and listening.